Hello, thank you for listening to 3 Legacies Recovery Recordings. If you enjoy our program, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to share with a friend. We're also self-supporting, so feel free to contribute to the channel through Venmo at Recovery Recordings 615. Please note that the views expressed on this podcast are solely our individual views and do not represent any official stance of any 12-step program. We are not affiliated with any specific recovery organization, and this content should not be considered as professional advice for alcoholism or addiction.
Hello everyone, welcome to 3 Legacies Recovery Recordings. I'm your host Paul. Today is Sunday, April 27th, 2025, and this is episode 27. Again, I want to thank all the listeners, all the comments that we've had coming in, all the different emails, and all the support we've been getting from everyone. Our email address is recoveryrecordings615@yahoo.com. Also want to advise everyone, let everyone know that we are on some of the major platforms. We're on Audible, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and several others, and Podomatic. It's one of them. And tonight we have, this is it's actually this third episode with our guest tonight, but the second on this series. The series is, it's called From a Self-Centered to a God-Centered Life, and we got Aaron H. from Nashville. How's it going, Aaron?
Going good, man. I'm happy to be here, and I was more excited about tonight. I'm always excited to come on here, but just because how we're kind of right in the middle of the, the step process, I was looking forward to this. So, but now things are going good, man. I appreciate you having me, and I'm looking forward to it.
I appreciate you, man. I tell you, since the first time we met, your energy was just powerful, man. You've came to for all the listeners. I've met Aaron at my home group. We both live in the Nashville area, and Aaron had come to my home group and presented. Led one of our meetings, and the energy was just powerful, man. Since that night, I was like, I want to do some work with Aaron. Yeah, and this is it, man. For the listeners, Aaron was the first guest we had on the podcast, which was special. And that was back in December. Y'all can go check that out. December, I think it was 16th or 17th. And then here we are on. I enjoyed it so much that I had Aaron come back on and do just share his journey through some of the steps with us. And here we are. And I'll tell you what I was sharing with you earlier was one of my favorite things I took. I'm probably going to botch what you said, but one of the things I took away last week was that you was like, I've never seen a situation where God thought it was, a good idea for me to hang on. We were talking about harboring resentments, right? It's never been a situation where he was like, yeah, you should hold on to this one, right? Yeah. Yeah, it's funny though, because especially in the earlier days, there was a lot of times where that would have went right over my head. Today, it's like, oh, okay, clearly this isn't it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm super excited.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, it's it's funny in those situations. Like sometimes you can't find what you're doing wrong. If somebody's, say somebody's done you really dirty or whatever. It's like, I don't know what your part or, my part is, whatever, but if nothing else, I need to be trying to get free of that. It's funny. Excuse me. I was years and years, I think this was back in either 2010 or 2012, and I was in a halfway house. And it's a long story, but I was like trying to kind of diet and, get in shape. You know how people in early recovery do. And
Yeah.
I was trying to cut out calories. So I bought some tea, a box of like 100 tea bags, to make tea. And I was like using like Splenda because it's calorie free, you know what I'm saying? So I could have like a sweet tea drink, with no. And anyhow, one day I came home and I thought some of my tea was missing out of the box, and I mean like a bag or two or three, it's just the only thing that tipped me off was that the box wasn't closed like properly. And so I'm searching through everyone's rooms, like in their trash cans for like tea bags. And, I'm saying I'm trying to find the culprit.
Yeah.
And we had a house meeting that night, and we were having it in the basement. It was a walkout basement. I remember I left the door unlatched. The door swung out. and I was going to confront everyone. And when I found out who it was, I was just going to, grab them and throw them through the door and, whatever, maybe get whooped myself. I don't know, but we were going to fight.
Yeah.
And right before, I have like a history of like assaults and, just different things. I'm in a halfway house. I don't need to go to jail again. And I called my sponsor right before that house meeting, and he answered, and he's like, "What's up?" I was like, "I need to talk to you right now. Like, you need to get," and he could hear it in my voice, and I heard him like leaving the room he was in, like, and got to a quiet place, and he was like, "What's going on, man?" And I was like, "I think someone's stealing some of my tea." And he like went silent, and he was like, "Why are you so upset?" I was like, "Well, whoever did that must, they must think I'm a punk. Like they must, I'm going on, and I never forget it. Anyway, the point of he goes, "What's our code?" And I was like, "Hey, Sam, dog." I was like, "I don't have time for riddles." You know what I'm saying? I was like, "In case you can't tell," I was like, "This is not this is not a joking kind of matter." He goes, "No, I'm not joking either." He goes, "What's our code?" And he was talking about love and tolerance of others is our code. And he goes, period. He goes, "There's no asterisks at the bottom. Like love and tolerance of others is our code unless the other person's in the wrong. Or love and tolerance of others is our code, like unless they owe you money. Or, it's just period." And I'll never. I remember standing in that bathroom. I didn't stay sober since then. Like I relapsed since then, but I'll never, as long as I live, forget that. And anyway, I'm glad. Anyway, but it kind of goes along the lines with if you vandalize my house, I'm going to call the police. You know what I'm saying? But I'm not going to be hopefully staying up at night with my fist clenched, like plotting revenge for when you make bond. So, but anyway, but yeah, man. Well, I appreciate you bringing that up, dude. Yeah.
Appreciate you, and that which actually leads us into where we're at. So last week, for the listeners, I also encourage everyone to go back and listen to last week's, and then so we went through steps 1 all the way to the end of 4, and then now we're on 5. So that kind of leads us into this episode.
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit about your experiences with the 5th step.
Yeah, man. Well, the 5th step was really, really, really good for me, for a lot of different reasons. And, it was the one, I was the most reluctant to do, the most fearful of. And you always hear people in the rooms, that people are sharing, they'll be like, "Man, there was stuff I wasn't telling nobody, and like stuff I was taking to my grave." And I had that same stuff, you know what I'm saying? Or, just whatever. That was my apprehension. It wasn't that I didn't want to sit down for a few hours. I was embarrassed about, talking about it. And I had a guy that now keep in mind that this is one person's opinion that I happen to kind of agree with. If if somebody disagrees or something like that, that's fine.
Yeah.
We don't have to, but this guy was doing a group one time, or maybe I forgot who it was, just to be completely transparent. It was either my sponsor or Scott L. And he goes, when particularly men, when they don't want to share something on their 5th step, he goes, it generally falls into 6 categories. And he says, 1 is, homosexual activity, 2 is molestation, 3 is, some sort of rape, statutory, the whole drug date rape. 4, this is not a political statement. This is not reflective of a stance. Like if somebody doesn't have a problem with this, I'm not telling you should. And if someone has, it bothers some people.
Yeah.
But abortion, either paying for one, convincing someone to have one, something like that. 5 is harm, beyond a fist fight, like you hit someone when you're drunk driving and kept driving, or shot somebody, just really mess somebody up, set someone's house on fire, something like that.
Yeah.
And 6 is some sort of, sexual deviance, and you can use your imagination, looking at stuff on the internet, you shouldn't. Yeah. I mean, just any kind of, just really not great sexual stuff. He goes, that's it. He goes, that when people don't want to talk about stuff on their 5th step, it's not because they used to be some mobster in Vietnam, that like cut fingers. You know what I'm saying? It's not like it always comes down to well, not always. I shouldn't say always, but let's just say a large majority of the time. And so when I was going through the 5th step, well, first of all, when we read the pages in, we read 72, 73, 74, and halfway through 75 after we prayed, when we were sitting down to do the 5th step. And there was 3 times, I don't know the exact, I think Bill said, he goes, they were, told their whole stories, but held on, or, took inventory, but held on to some of the worst items in stock. And then it says, they told their story or something, but tried to keep to themselves certain facts about their lives. And then towards the end on 75, where he says, we had to expose, whatever, every nook, every dark cranny of the past. And he goes, those certain facts and worst items in stock and dark crannies, he goes, those are the one or two or three or four things that no one wants to talk about. And, withholding those, like the step, doesn't really mean a whole lot. Or, well, I don't know how he said, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but you know what I'm saying.
Sure.
If I'm 99% honest on my fifth step, I almost might as well not even do one, like in some regards. But anyway, I love where it said, we pocket our pride and go to it. And just, for a minute, just put our pride to the side. And anyhow, but probably my saving, I'm not sure if I would be here today if my sponsor hadn't done this. And I do it with my guys now. But we went through that list of 6. He told me, the list. And then whatever was applicable on that list to him, he shared with me before I said anything.
Yeah.
And for a lot of, like, for one, I mean, like, street mentality, it's like, now I feel better about opening up because I have something on you too, and
Yeah.
and two, I saw how much this really meant to him, because up until then I knew my sponsor cared, but it's, what do you meet me on Monday mornings to go through the book a little bit like that? I mean, you could do that with someone you don't like when he did that with me. I was like, oh damn, this dude actually like cares about my life and like believes in this work and like trusts God enough to, I could have gone and shared that with anybody. He couldn't have stopped me.
Yeah.
And so that really dropped my guard. It really, really did. And I was able to, to get honest about, and I'm not saying it's any better or worse than, the next man or whatever. But, some stuff I didn't want to talk about, I was able to get it out. And the other part was, there's the part in the book that, our troubles are of our own making, and all that type of stuff. And, all the resentments, some of my sponsors, some of it I saw from doing the prayer work and working on 4, but there was some that stuck. And, he, everything on my resentment list, for example, if somebody's familiar with the 4-column inventory, a 4-column resentment, some people do 5 columns, but the 4-column, either somebody did something to me in column 2 that I didn't like, and I acted inappropriately in column 4. So, owed an amends. Or I did something in column 4 first that was inappropriate, and the person I was resentful at reacted in column 2. You know what I'm saying? So there again, I owe an amends for that.
Yeah.
C was selfishness, self-centeredness got me into a situation to begin with. Like say, and this doesn't even necessarily pertain to me, but there was, say a dude has a girlfriend, or a girl has a boyfriend, or a boy has a boyfriend, whatever the hell. You're in a relationship with somebody, and your partner does some bad things. They cheat on you, they lied to you, and I go over in column 4 and I say, well, I didn't do anything wrong. You can always ask yourself, like, how did you meet that person? Like, what kind of, did you meet them in the choir? Like, I think we talked about this, like were y'all in the librry studying? It's like, oh no, it was we were taking shots at the bar, and and then she gave me a free tattoo, and I thought, it's kind of like, did God lead you there, or was that kind of, and after going through it, it was really hard to be mad at anybody. You know what I mean? Because like I said, I either did something that made them react, or they did something just being them, and I reacted. Or I should have never been there to begin with. It's just like, police officers. I love them now. I really do. I'm grateful for them, especially having kids, like knowing I can just call them. Like, but I always thought, I was mistreated, and you know how people think about cops and active addiction.
Yeah.
And I remember my sponsor, I was telling him how rough they had been on me and all the extra charges. And we may have talked about this last week. He goes, were you ever framed? And I was like, well, what do you mean? He goes, did a cop ever walk up, twirling their pistol on their finger and just drop a bag of illicit substances and lock you up for it? I was like, well, no, I was always doing something. He goes, yeah. He goes, if you weren't breaking the law, you would, we wouldn't be having this conversation. And, the 4th step or the 5th step, it cleared all that up. And then, with the fears, the same thing, I spoke about all my fears, and something about saying them out loud, it's almost like they disappear. I heard a guy say that fears are almost never in the present. you could really say never. Like even if somebody has a horrible illness that it's terminal, like if you're not dying that second, like the fear's in the future, like what's going to happen, you know what I mean? And something about voicing them kind of brought them to the present. And I believe that's, I mean, I believe God's omnipresent, all that stuff, but it's something about bringing them in the present. Like it's almost like they went away.
Hmm.
And then the sex inventory, that's it's this whole ball of wax, letting somebody in on that, to receive guidance and everything like that. But I think what was so freeing, it wasn't even like a lot of people will say it's like you're not like there was, oh, it felt good to get that off my chest. Don't get me wrong, it does. I'm not mocking that. That's very real. But what I loved was where it talks about, the guy living the double life and like wanting to enjoy a reputation he doesn't deserve. And like my whole thing, my whole kind of shtick, like I wanted people to think that I was a tough dude
Yeah.
and a cool dude and somebody who didn't really care what you thought and somebody who wasn't really afraid of anything and somebody with self-esteem and somebody, with whatever had, their, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And it's it's basically the exact opposite of that. I was always so fearful of everything, whether it was school or not having my homework or whether people liked me or not, or, getting whooped or, just anything. I didn't have self-esteem. You know what I'm saying? I just, it was just like waking up every single day, just trying to be something you're not. And for the first time, I could look at another guy and just be like, all this is bullshit. Every bit of it. Like I'm scared. I don't know what to do. I'm so petrified to drink that I'm gonna tell you this. And that was the relief for me. You know what I mean? Just kind of clearing the air. Just kind of like, hey, when it's like I was dead to rights a long time. Like I probably wasn't fooling too many people, but I never got to it. I just and for the first time I did, and it was just like I'll tell you what, and I'll quit kind of blabbering about the fifth step, but it's well, this is kind of a. I hope no one takes this the wrong way. Back in '03, I was in the state-run rehab and for drug court. And back in '03, it was a lot better. But the point is, they gave everyone in there AIDS test or HIV test, and I was negative. I'm not. I think one guy in there was positive, but that's not the point. They tested everyone, and then before they give you the results, they counseled you in case you were positive. And I remember they were talking about this study back in the late 80s or early 90s where they took, I think it was like some Skid Row mission in like LA, but this is a real story. And they took hundreds of these extremely high risk HIV patients in late 80s, early 90s, or whenever it was. If you had HIV, you were dead. There was zero medicine for it. You were dead and you were going to die a bad death. And so they took a bunch of these high risk people that basically knew they had HIV but wasn't sure. And they tested them all, and the vast majority came back positive, like 90 something percent. And they counseled these people that were positive and worked with them and all this. And they said virtually unanimously, the counselors would ask the question, like, how you doing with this news? Like, what are you thinking? Like, are you suicidal? How are you? How can we help you? And almost unanimously, they all said, it sucks. It's horrible that I have it. It's the worst news I've ever gotten in my life. I know I'm going to die. They said, but I feel better now knowing than before I got tested. And I mean, with the death sentence, it felt better. And it's kind of, I'm not going to word it the very best now, but it was kind of like that with like this program, with like admitting I'm screwed, like fessing up to something, laying all my cards on the table. It's embarrassing. But it's just kind of like, I feel better that the jig's up. You know what I'm saying? Like that I'm not walking around under constant pressure and worry anymore. It's just kind of like, here's what it is. It might not be great, but at least there's no more. It's all out on the table now. But anyway,
Absolutely, yeah. No, I can
but
relate.
what about you, man?
I love all that. I really like how you had talked about how sharing it with them, sharing it, because it wasn't my experience. I've done probably 6 fifth steps now, and say 5 or 6, and it wasn't always my experience where they shared some of their deepest, darkest stuff. with me, but it was a game changer when that started changing. When that process happened, when they started sharing, because it lightened the load. And I could really relate to a lot of the stuff you were talking about with those. What was it? 6 things that generally the stuff that we don't want to share with people. A lot of mine was in some of that, in those categories. Actually, all of it was in those categories, and so it was a game changer. Also, like part of that process with them sharing theirs with me was I didn't feel alone anymore, because some of the stuff they were sharing with me was some of the stuff that I was like taking to the bank, never going to share with somebody, right? And when they would share theirs with me, it was like, wow, like here it is. Like a lot of, generally when I was picking whoever it was I was doing my fifth step with, it was like someone I looked up to, and I felt like, I walked into the situation thinking like they're never going to look at me the same, and then they're like, oh, me too. And I'm like, what? So it was like, wow, and then, so I was able to look, I was able to not look at myself so different. And then also, I do the same thing with my guys. I share whatever it is, I don't always share 100% of it obviously with everyone, but I share a lot of my deep, dark, dirty stuff that I didn't want to share with people. It doesn't have the same effect on me that it did when I first come in, which is part of what I got from the fifth step. Sharing it enough, so it doesn't have so much effect on me. I'm a firm believer that like I could share pretty much every single detail of my fifth step with the majority of the people out in the world, as long as like if I felt like it was going to do some good, and obviously certain situations it would cause harm. So, and also like one of the best things about the fifth step was that I wasn't able to see certain stuff. It's particularly how I had certain fears and stuff going on. I wasn't always able to see how self-centered it was. And my current sponsor, the last fifth step I did, he was like, oh yeah, we all want to feel special in some way, right? My ego wants me to feel special in some ways, and I've been hanging on to some stuff that for a while that was just delusional, So those are big, and I really love like when I'm actually listening to a fifth step with a guy. Depending on I was talking to a guy earlier tonight about this, and we were talking about like your first fifth step or your second fifth step. If it's the first or second year of your sobriety, looks way different than the fifth step you're going to do at 5 or 10 years sober, right? And like so, I enjoy like. Before I really started sponsoring a lot of different guys and had a whole lot of different experience with this, I'd felt like every one of them was supposed to be similar, and they're not. I mean, it depends on where someone's at, whether they can comprehend certain stuff, and all this. But I think a lot of the importance of it was what they were willing to share, and for me, that was the key to it. And yeah, for that's awesome. I tell you. Yeah, there was, and obviously there's always certain, one of the game changers with sex ideals was that, I had this like piece of this tool, that I could carry around, for lack of a better term, kind of carry with me and go through life with, and be like, okay, what ideally am I trying to aim towards, right? And I don't necessarily, and this is touching on the fourth step, obviously, but like, I don't necessarily, I don't just use it as a sex conduct tool. I have ideals for all kinds of stuff. Right. And, so that was kind of a game changer for me whenever I had something that I was aiming towards in life. Right. And I didn't actually, generally when I'm sitting down with a guy, they usually don't have sex ideals or ideals about any part of their life until we sit down, because we kind of go over that together. By the time we get to the end of a piece of inventory, by the end of a piece of inventory, you have a pretty good idea on like what you probably shouldn't be doing, right? In this way, we shape a sane and sound ideal. So I'll have them pull out a piece of paper and start writing some of their ideals, and which was a game changer for me. Yeah, good stuff, man.
Yeah. I love it, man. I love it.
Yeah. Let's roll into 6 and 7. I tell you, like for me, the one line that really stood out for me on 6 was, are we now ready to let God remove all these things which we have admitted are objectionable, right? And that was again, depending on where I was at in my recovery, like for the first 4 years, 5 years of my recovery, I'm sure it's a lot of stuff unconsciously still going on in my life in this manner, but there was a lot of stuff that I'd been doing that was extremely harmful, like in my personal relationship and, some of the closest people around me. And, but I hadn't really had gotten dove into the work and found it objectionable. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I was probably like 4 or 5, yeah, I was probably 4 or 5 years sober whenever I'd actually got into the book. And I was like, holy crap, man, just the eye-opening experience I had where but that one line right there was huge. It said, are we now ready to let God remove these things which we have admitted are objectionable? And like I said, I think that's as well the rest of this stuff, this work, that's something that's constantly, transforming or evolving, should I say? How about you on 6?
Well, no, same thing, man. I mean, there was a lot of things that I really thought benefited me, and like I was never never mean. I mean, even in school, like if I saw someone getting picked on, like I just didn't have the heart to, like I felt bad for the kid. It wasn't like, oh yeah, let me get my leg, you know what I mean? Like I had a big heart, but still in like good fun, I like joking on people, and I really enjoy gossip and I like, money. And, I think well, as long as I'm not really hurting anybody, like this stuff makes me more popular and more and it just doesn't, it's lots of times I'll sit around and I'll think about the people. Warren Buffett actually said this, strangely enough. He's the farthest thing from Alcoholics Anonymous, or and you know what I'm saying. But he goes, if there's someone you really admire, he goes, make a list of the characteristics they have that you admire. He goes, and then think of somebody you really don't like you wouldn't even want to spend 3 minutes in an elevator with. He goes, and write down the characteristics of them that you don't like. And, like I said, I thought kind of being, outspoken and trying to be the coolest guy, or, what, I'm not saying I was ever cool. I'm just, how it is.
Sure.
Trying to strive to be the top and, make a scene or whatever, that people like that. But they really don't. Like the people that I really admire are generally humble. Like they're not, hurting other people. They're not talking shit. They're not saying negative things about people. They're reliable, they're trustworthy, you just feel safe around them. And it's just, I don't even mean in a physical sense. Like if they're if you were sick in a hospital and they walked in, even though they're not a doctor or anything, they can't help you, you just feel better around them. And then the people that I don't want to be around are loud and obnoxious and bragging and, putting other people down. I just don't like that.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to realize that. And it's and even if you have business problem, or me, I have business problems, or court, sometimes things end up in lawsuits, land deals, disputes, whatever. And you think man, you can't just lay down. They'll exploit that. You need to send them a real stern letter, just get their attention. And I'm not, now don't get me wrong, I can't lay down or anything like that. But these principles work everywhere. You know what I mean? I really think that, somebody in the long run trying to live under principles and not harm anybody and all this and that, I think they'll come out better. But I love the part in step 6 where, and it says it, I think it says it in the big book, and I know it says it in the 12 and 12. It's like you said, can he remove all these things we've admitted are objectionable? And it's almost like Bill expects us to say, yeah, oh yeah, of course I'm on the beam. I just dropped my fifth. Yeah, hell yeah. And it goes, then the next line is, can he now have everyone? Yeah. Can he now have them all? Everyone? You sure about that, asshole? You know what I'm saying? You positive? You understand. What about it? And I love how Bill does, because he knows we're gonna say yes. It's just, you sure about that? And it's the whole kind of like how 6 and 7 separate. It's kind of like how 8 and 9 are separate. There's things I honestly didn't want to let go of, but it basically says we're in the clear as long as we don't look up at God and say, hey dog, you're never getting this. As long as we don't do that, we're cool. So to me, and I don't have the book in front of me, but basically I can say, hey God, I still enjoy doing this. I'm not sure I really want to give it up at all, but I'm going to be willing. I just help me be willing. You know what I'm saying? And and that works. And I love how, anytime, like, say someone was obstinate, like they're trying to prove a point, they don't want to work the steps, they don't think it's going to work, and they're just looking for reasons not to do something. There's fail safes all through the book. Like if somebody came in like, well, how about you? It's like, what? Can you just, be open to the idea that
Yeah.
maybe? It's like, you'd have to be a real asshole to be like, no, absolutely not.
Yeah.
So it's like when you think you got the book just comes through and whoops, it spanks you,
Thank
a little
God,
bit.
dude. Yeah, thank
Yeah,
God.
I know. But anyway,
That's funny.
but yeah, this is out real quick, but I just heard this in a meeting maybe a month ago. But they said, in step two, it goes, we ask ourselves one short question: do we now believe, or are we even willing to believe there's a power greater than ourselves? And the guy talking, he goes, no, if the answer is no, no, I don't believe. No, I'm not even willing to believe. He goes, I would have to ask, why? like,
Yeah.
why are you not even like, are you that big of a, what I'm saying? But anyway, it was just,
Yeah.
I mean, that is a
Sure.
good guy. I never thought of it. Like, why are you so obstinate? Like, what, you just got a point to prove, or,
Yeah.
but anyway, but yeah, that's 6 for me, man.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Which is, it goes into what we were just talking about, how the whole thing's evolving. It's like, I don't always find, honestly, it's a lot of times I'm not really willing, not a lot of times, the majority of the times, I'm not really willing to let go of something unless I find it objectionable enough, right? And it was one of those situations where, like, I remember when I first started seeing this stuff, and it was like clearly like, holy crap, this is causing a lot of problems in my life, right? And then where I got close with God was during that process of the 6 and 7, right? It was like, I heard Mike L, and he was talking about him and Don Pritz was fishing one day, and he said, he asked Don, he was like, what is it? Why do I keep, doing this stuff? Like, for like, I don't remember exact wording, but Don looked at him and was like, he said, Mike, it's kind of like what we're doing here fishing. It's catch and release, right? He was like, this ain't about the fish. This is about us getting to spend time together, right? And it was saying that he's saying like that's the key to 6 and 7. It's like my character defects are going to continue me seeking a relationship with God over and over again, because I realize, I got a little bit of awareness, so I realize like, holy crap, I can't quit this, right? It's like I'm enjoying this a little too much, and it's starting to become a problem, right? And that's where I start getting close to God, And I loved how when he shared that story. Can you relate to any of that?
Yeah, well, yeah, 100%, man. There's also a part, and I can't remember if it's in 6 or 7 in the 12 and 12, but it kind of talks about like we came in as willing as could be to do anything to quit drinking, but like when things are just kind of, when we're stubbing our toe, like when it's not like life or death, like I'm a lot more reluctant to give it up. You know what I mean? Like
sure.
if somebody said like, if you cut somebody out again, you're doing life in penitentiary without parole, I would never do it again. But if it's just like, it might be a little awkward when I see them next, like I'm going to keep doing it. But it's like, my thing was, I kind of, as much as I can, I try to shift my thinking or remind myself that living as I think God would have me
Amen.
works out better than what I think I should do.
Tenfold.
And I'm not trying to sound super pious, like and I don't do it anywhere near perfectly, but like I know going to a soup kitchen and feeding people's probably a good thing. I know shooting somebody's probably a bad thing.
Yeah.
But say I have a guy I'm working with and they do something to piss me off personally, I will genuinely think like they need to be set straight. Like, let's not spare the rod here. Like, I mean, it's biblical, for Christ. They need to hear it in a very aggressive, like kind of frightening way. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
that will get their attention. They probably won't do it again. You know what I'm saying? Like that, I can convince myself that is the way I need to do it.
Yeah.
And if somebody says, well, have you pulled them aside yet? Well, no, we're way past that. They've done this 10 different times. Well, why haven't you pulled them aside on the first? Oh, I don't know. I was busy. I had to, well, why don't you talk to them? You know what? I'm like, dude, that's lame. That's they're not gonna just try. I've come to find out that like those avenues work better than mine. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I mean, that might not be the best example, but I really do try to remember that even if I can't see it, it's kind of like God knows what he's. It's like if you're on an airplane and like you're late for but you're flying into Dallas for a meeting, like you're landing, you land, and then right when you get a couple thousand feet off the ground, the plane starts going back up in the air, and you're like, what's going on? And you grab the flight attendant. She's like, I don't know, sir, just buckle up, and you're pissed, and you jerk, and then finally they come and they're like, there was there's an obstruction on the runway. Like if we landed, like we'd all be dead right now. Like the pilot knew that. I'm just being inconvenienced. What the hell's going on here? Don't they know better? And it's just kind of like if something, I don't know, if God's telling me something, even if I don't see it, it's just like when I listen to it, it pays off.
Yeah.
And that's really how I treat. I mean, just years ago, I started having my sponsor review my texts that I thought were perfect before I sent them, and they were very rarely perfect. Like now, I mean, I don't raise my voice to people. I do a lot of, usually, what I'm saying? I do a lot of things differently now because I'm not because I'm such a great guy, but because I have a Rolodex now of proof experiences that it works out better when I try to
Yeah.
let someone else run my life.
Sure. Well said. Well said. It kind of touches on what you finished. I'm sorry. Was you finished?
Oh, no. Yeah, I'm done.
Appreciate that. It touches on, like when you talked about the 12 and 12, I just opened my 12 and 12 up. 7 and 12 and 12 was my favorite. It says, true, most of us thought that good character was desirable, but obviously good character was something one needed to get on with the business of being self-satisfied. It says, with a proper display of honesty and morality, we'd stand a better chance of getting what we really wanted. Yeah. But whenever we had to choose between character and comfort, the character building was lost at the dust of the in the dust of our chase after what we had thought was happiness. Right. Seldom did we look at character building as something desirable in itself, something we would strive for, whether its instinctual needs were met or not. We never thought of making honesty, tolerance, and true love of man and God the daily basis of our living, which is exactly what you were just talking about, right? And it's cool because, like, you go through this body of work and you start to see, like, something happens internally, right? It's like, hopefully, right? I mean, that's what we're hoping for, right? You have some kind of shift to where, like, it's particularly around 6 and 7 where you start, the first six steps are, pretty much dealing with untreated alcoholism. And then like the next 6 is like, okay, now we have this like ideal on what we're trying to aim towards. Right. And now we're trying to aim towards just having better character and living, from what we think God's will is. Right. And I think the ideals was really good for me on that, and we just started doing, which is similar to the ideals list, and which we just started doing this thing where we call it prayer, meditate, and vision, where you do all 3 and you put them together. Because it's like, for example, in step 9, it says, each morning we ask our Creator to show us the way of patience, tolerance, kindliness, and love, right? And it's like, okay, patience, tolerance, kindliness, and love. Let's meditate on each one of these principles, right? And then let's do a vision on what it would look like to be kind, to be loving, to be tolerant, and patient with each one of these people, whoever it is that I'm going to be dealing with today, right? So it's like, it's humility, right? Setting my own personal stuff aside because I believe that, I have these experiences now that this is like tenfold better than what I could have done with it, right? Which is key, and it's what you were just saying. Good stuff. Yeah, that's good stuff.
Excuse me. No, I love that, man. I was in a meeting. This was again before I got sober this time, like when I was still kind of floundering. And a girl read that in a meeting. It was ODAT in Nashville, Saturday night. I still remember it. And she talked about, when we had to choose between character and comfort, character was lost in the dust, in the pursuit of whatever we thought was happiness, chase what we thought was happiness. Yeah. And she was like, thought, like we thought we were getting the better deal. And, but it's Don Pritz. One time I was listening to a tape, and I've listened to this particular tape probably a dozen times, literally, maybe a little, maybe more. And he goes, I believe selfishness is at my core. He goes, it's in my toenails. He goes, there's nothing I can do about it. He goes, and I've come to believe, and if I'm not quoting him perfectly, like, forgive me, you know what I'm saying? But he basically goes, I've come to believe this program is, or he goes, self-interest is at my core. He goes, and I believe that this program is one of enlightened self-interest. And that means that I've found the best way for me to get mine is to make sure that you get yours.
Amen.
And because it was always the opposite. Like, if I give you the big piece of pizza, like, I'm going to have the small one. Like, wait, it doesn't take a physics major, you know what I'm saying? Like, to understand, I'm getting screwed here. But my life turned out horrible. I lived under that philosophy for decades, and I was broke, no friends, nowhere to live, unhappy, self-esteem shit. In anyway, but one I'll tell you, there's this treatment center that I'm not officially involved with. I don't work there. I'm not an investor. I'm not on the board. Zero affiliation. But I went through there years ago, and I volunteer there quite frequently. And kind of their model is people go through the 30-day program, and then they have an extended care, for a month or two or whatever. And then if the treatment center has their way, you stay there and you live in like some sort of sober living or whatever in this little town, and you get a job at the treatment center. And they don't pay you anything. I mean, if I told you what they paid people, I mean, you would think badly of the treatment center. I mean, it's just, it's laughable. And, and there's lots of reasons for that, but, they're also the cheapest treatment center in the area. But anyway, neither here nor there. The point is, they sometimes pitch this idea to people like, hey, you're in this podunk town you're not from. Why don't you stay here for a year, 18 months, work for us, make nothing, work third shift, work in the kitchen, all this, live in this grimy little halfway house. And some people take that deal. And then you have other people that come to this treatment center. And of course, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but, dudes will come through. They're college educated. They've got a, beautiful wife. They've got a nice house. They've got the right degree. Their father owns a construction company, and they're the superintendent, and they hear that deal and they say, you can go screw yourself. Like, I'm going back to my king size bed in the suburbs with my wife. I have all the right connections. And person number one is humble and trying to learn and trying to do right. Person number two, they're not even necessarily a bad person. They're just not super interested in living by spiritual principles. Yeah. And they go back now. If you showed an 8-year-old, a 30-year-old, anyone in society, and you said, which one of these guys is going to have a better life 2 years from now? Most people would be like, if you're not in the program, you say, guy number 2 with the big house and the nice job and the kid, But I know for a fact, I would bet every nickel I've got blind on any one of these that dude number 1 is going to have a better life 24 months down the road. Sure. And that's kind of if someone's, well, I'll say, if I'm an alcoholic and if I'm running the show myself and I think I know what's best, I'm going to crash and burn, whether I get drunk or whether my personality, anyway, all I'm getting at is, that's the type of stuff I try to, how I think about like step 7, like giving God, even though I think this works, even though I think this is smarter, even though I think the bed will be more comfortable. Like, I try to just say, what do I need to get rid of here? And what do I need to replace it with? Like, in order to be closer to God. And when I do that, everything in my life has worked out more like, I'm doing better. I'm not a smart enough businessman to be doing as well as I'm doing in business. I'm not a domesticated, docile, little house cat, but I have a beautiful marriage and 4 kids. Like, I'm not, I don't know. I never used to have friends, and now I have more than I can keep up with. Like, and I didn't go to the Himalayas and get real Zen. Like, I'm not, what I'm saying? Like, the only stuff I did was this work, and my life's better than just about anyone. You know what I'm saying? Sure. But anyway,
tenfold. My experience is the exact same thing. I got sober in a recovery house, and I'd seen that a lot. It was, my personal experience was, I was making $10 an hour for the first 2 years I was sober, right? And I'd see a lot of guys come in, and they were like, and I didn't want to make $10 an hour. I seen guys come in making a bunch of money, different, luckily at that time I was so desperate, man, where I was like, look, talking to my sponsor on a regular basis, like, this is what I want to do. What do you think? And he'd always be like, just sit back and watch. Let's do a whole lot of this. And we'd get real involved in the work. And, none of those guys, and I'm not saying that it's not possible for some, people to come in and start making a lot of money and stuff, but generally speaking, none of that stuff really panned out very well for them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And, which is backwards, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, my experience matches that completely.
Yeah.
I still have guys that have that are, and again, for those that are listening, we're not speaking for AA, we're not speaking for any 12-step program, but I have my experience, right? And I'll have guys that come in and they're like, thinking they'd be better off like this and better off like that if these conditions were met, or wishing they didn't have to walk to work every day, or whatever it is. There's a place down the road where they'll give me rides and this, and it's really spirit. They continue to talk over and over again in all this work. Still more spiritual growth, right? Still more spiritual development. Still more spiritual development, right? And sometimes, in my experience, again, it's just my experience, but when I'm having a whole lot of resistance towards life is when I got to work that spiritual muscle that I'm not used to working, right? And if all my conditions are being met, I'm not necessarily working that spiritual muscle, I had this situation where it was like, I heard this guy once say, I got here and I'd never made it all the way through a filling before, right? He was like, anytime something started feeling bad, I ran for the hills, right? And it's true, right? Yeah, so that's how it was. It was like, I got here, I had this sponsor, I was calling this guy and talking to him about life on a pretty regular basis. We started learning how to apply principles, and as situations started to occur, at the times I was looking at them like problems. I got to, develop more on this spiritual muscle, trust God, trust that, something bigger than me other than my own reasoning and my own feelings and stuff, right? Which was key to this whole thing. And that's not always, if my conditions are being met by, a lot of different stuff, it's more challenging for people at times, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, man. So we'll be at 8 and 9.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to go, or you want me to go, or what?
Yeah, you go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, well, 8 and 9, man. First off, I'll say, I may have shared about this, but, when I could never get sober, my sponsor asked me, he goes, have you ever done all 12 steps? And I was like, yeah, of course. I've been through so many rehabs. And he goes, and he gave me the whole, like, everything out of the book, everything it says to do, like all of it, and I was like, and the first thing that came in my mind was 8 and 9, because I had some genuine attempts at sobriety before I actually got sober this time. And my amends were basically just an apology to my parents and whoever I was dating at the time. Like, and I would have I could have passed a lie detector test and told you I had done 8 and 9. And this time my sponsor, there's some debate, and I'm not pretending to be a scholar or anything, but when we get to 8 in the book, it says, we have a list of all persons we had harmed and toward whom we were willing to make amends. We made it when we took inventory. And some people kind of, I guess, infer, that means the 4th step, and like I said, I can't swear it does or doesn't, but one thing my sponsor had me do, he goes, he made me get note cards, and this isn't in the book, okay, but he goes, get note cards. He goes, and one, all of your resentments, make a note card for each of them. You don't like your old boss, write his name on the front, on the back, what you did wrong, what you owe the amends for, this and that, every single resentment. He goes, I'm not saying we're going to make them, just because if unless my 4th column was blank, I harmed that person in some way.
Yeah.
And then, you know what I'm saying? Sure. And none of them were blank, a little spoiler, And he said, and we're going to do the same thing with your sex inventory. You write down all the names, one per card, on the back, what you want amends for. He goes, now, especially, I'm not saying we're going to do all these. We might not do, we'll see, but make the cards regardless. I'm going to be the one to determine what you do and don't do, not you. Yeah. And then he said, he calls it like unrelated harms. And he says, and again, this isn't in the literature, so if you disagree, you could be right and I could be wrong. For real, I mean that wholeheartedly. But he goes, there may be, if you ever stole from Walmart, but Walmart's not on your resentment list. You just stole from them. Or maybe you split some kid on spring break. You just hit someone on the beach and right in the mouth to impress some girls. You don't know who the guy is. He's from Mississippi. You're from Kentucky. No, he's not on your resentment list. You owe an amends. And so I made note cards for each of those people. And then he asked me, he goes, is there any one of these cards that you would not make an amends right now if I asked you to? Like right here sitting in that chair, like get their number, call them, ask them to me, is there anyone you wouldn't do? And I was like, well, I wouldn't say wouldn't. I was like, there's a lot I don't want to do. I'd probably put off or make it. He goes, okay. He goes, pray for those. He goes, you got to pray for the willingness to, to do that. And I love in the book, it talks about, maybe that he has done us more harm than we have done him, talking about some amends, because there was some real pieces of work I got, some dudes that were just really horrible people. And I maybe like I punked him one, like there was a guy I worked with and he was just horrible to everybody. And he's one of those guys, he didn't understand that people actually fought. Like I'm not being, it's like he didn't know that. He thought, I don't know if he grew up in a country club or where you could just tease the waiter and like, yes, sir, sorry, I'll get you. It's like he really thought that. And one day anyway, we kind of got into it. And like, that's a good example. This dude, he had it coming. It's like that Justin Bieber, it's somebody that likes everyone, hates this guy. Like, you know what I mean? Like he's one of, but I went to, making amends and I cleaned it up. And that's a whole, another story, but we went through the amends and, if it was going to do any more harm, obviously we didn't do them. A lot of people, it says, except, made direct amends except when to do so would injure them or others. Some people, I've heard it said, it means like, well, I'm others. Like if it's going to hurt me, I don't do it. I don't subscribe to that philosophy. It talks about, we had to be willing to make the amends regardless of the personal consequences. There's not one amends I needed to make that wouldn't, at least on the surface. If I owe you $50, it's going to hurt me to pay you $50. Like, does that mean I don't pay you? And I'm not trying to mock anyone. I'm just trying to get my point across.
Sure.
But if an amends was going to, maybe get me fired or get me in prison or something, I couldn't, support my family. It tells me to consult with those who would be affected.
Yeah.
But it's some of the most, amends is one of those things. I never done it. And I do want to say I never really felt a part of the program. All the times I was in the program and all the meetings and all this, I always felt like either the new guy or the guy that was lost and just didn't belong there. When I made amends, I was laughing like a goofball at jokes that weren't funny, just like everyone else had been for years. When you come into AA and everyone's just having too good of a time and they're too friendly to people. And like, hey, Jerry, I love the hat. Did you make that? Oh, shit, your wife made that. And, you just sit there untreated, kind of like, what? It's a hat, homeboy. Like, quit, glazing. And like, but it's like I became one of those people. Like I started getting free.
Yeah.
And anyway, but one of the there was this will be the last thing I'll say about this. The amends were great. There was a lot of people I owed an amends to. They needed their money. They needed, whatever. But my sponsor, he's big on saying whatever is. It doesn't have to be with amends. If I get a feeling or something's indicated, he'll go do it. And I'm like, no, I don't want to do it. And it was just a thought. Like, I don't want to go hang by the park and draw birds. I don't draw a bird. I don't draw. He'll go, just go do it. And he goes, usually it's not the thing that something magical happens. He goes, it's you following the suggestion and putting yourself in the position that something else will happen from it. Yeah. And one example of that, my dad, this is probably a 2-minute story, maybe 3. I don't know.
Take your time.
Okay. Well, my dad, he put me through a handful of treatments, not cheap ones. And, of course I wrecked cars. He got me attorneys, and I was incarcerated, in halfway houses for a lot of my life. And he would send me checks for noodles and such, I owed him a bunch of money. And when I made an amends to him at 6, 8, 10 months sober, he said he didn't want any of the money, and he knew I didn't have it anyway. So my brother was killed in February of 2018, and it was a brutal thing. He bled out inside my dad's house, like it was bad.
Wow.
And so after that, me and my dad, I was driving up to Louisville every week to have lunch with him. And one day we're having lunch, and I rode with him to lunch, which I never did. And then we picked up my grandpa, which we never did. We all had lunch. Anyway, it turned into like a day. And we get back to my dad's house, and I'm eager to get on the road because I needed to beat Louisville and Nashville rush hour. And he just, my dad keeps talking about my brother and this and that. And you know, I'm thinking, Dad, I gotta go. And finally I was like, you know what, screw it. Like, my brother just died. You know, how often do I see my dad, you know, once a week, you know? And so I decided to chill, and it was on my heart to make another amends to him because I was finally making a little bit of money. And I told him what I felt I owed him and how I wanted to pay him. And he goes, Aaron, he goes, I don't want it. You know, I don't need it. This is all I want. And I said, Dad, I want to be square with everybody. Like I want to be able to hold my head up and be square. And so he agreed to take the money over a payment plan. And 8 days later, he died from a sudden heart attack. My dad, yeah, he just dropped, you know, like no one saw it coming. And so I had this outstanding amends, and it was a big sum of money. And about a year or so after he died, I said, I work with alcoholics, and a lot of them don't have money, and, you know, they'll come in treatment or halfway houses, and they get in debt, you know, because they come in broke. And anyway, so I said, I'm going to make a little free center for him, for these guys, and I'm going to dedicate it to my father. And I found a house to buy. And it turns out, and no one could have planned this. I mean, I didn't even know but the closing date was on his birthday. Like, and no one could have planned that. I didn't pick the closing. I couldn't pick when we found the house. We just found one, went under contract. And so anyway, it was this totally free facility for 90 days. And the money that I was paying for the mortgage and for buying these guys food and paying the utilities, like, we weren't getting grants. There was no write-offs. It was me paying it. Yeah. And we did it for, I don't know, close to 2 years, but we just weren't able to help too many people. And because, you know, we didn't have the supervision, you know, we're dealing with the worst of the worst. Well, long story short, here's the end of the story. So I'm getting frustrated, not frustrated, just a little sad, you know, because it wasn't, you know, I didn't feel like we were helping too much. And some guy came and volunteered at this treatment, at this little place to do a group, and me and him got to know each other. And he was basically saying, hey, you know, I want to do this, you know, help alcoholics, but I don't have the, you know, infrastructure. And I said, well, you know, I buy property. That's what I do for a living. And so I started buying properties, and he would, you know, started leasing them to do this, you know, his deal. And that was back in about 2021, the spring of 2021. And today, and hey, please, I wish someone could look me in my eyes. I take absolutely zero credit for this, because I didn't answer the phone once. I did nothing. But I did meet this guy at the place for my dad, and they have gotten over, completely free of charge, over 3,000 people into treatment. You know, they made relationships with all these indigent centers within a 200-mile radius. They have transport that they were doing out of their own pocket, all this stuff. And I was at a little banquet for them celebrating. And I didn't even put it together. And they were talking about, we got over 3,000 people in treatment. Now, I didn't know this at the time, but when I opened the place, my ego was in it. Like, I wanted to be the guy to help people. I wanted to be the guy, you know, everyone called, oh, thank you, sir. You know, I secretly, I kind of wanted that. But all I really wanted was to help people in my father's name, you know, because he helped me. That's why I was giving the money back to Alcoholics and Drug Addicts. But just from opening that house, even though it didn't work out, I met a guy, and God worked through him, and now he's helping more people than anyone else I've ever met. You understand what I'm saying? It's just by putting myself in a position to make amends, like, just beautiful things happen in my life, in and around me. Yeah. And I that was a lot longer than 3 minutes, but
No,
I've got a bunch of stories like that, like, where it's just like I just put on the jersey, you know, and I just in any way. But yeah, what about you, man?
Yeah, I was in the same boat. My, you know, when I first got sober, for the first handful of years I was sober, you know, we dodged a lot of the non-step stuff, right? And it was under the same thing, you know, that'll cause harms to them or may cause harms to me. And in some of the situations, it's still, you know, there was amends I wasn't able to make because there would have been harms done towards other people, obviously. But I think that the most life-changing one was probably like where a relationship-changing one was towards my grandfather. I'm not going to go into details with a lot of, but I can say this: my grandfather and me have a relationship today, and my grandparents and me have a relationship today that we never had before, right? And I was always a part of their life as far as like, mooching off of them, or like there was my ace in the hole. Whenever things got bad, they'd always let me come there or whatever. And like I said, I'm not going to get into too much detail with it. But I had some money that I owed my grandfather, and some amends stuff that I needed to make with him. And after I did it, which was several years ago, whenever I did it, and my relationship with him, my grandparents have really, really, really changed. And it was cool because they've had some pretty difficult struggles over the last couple of years, and I talk to them on a pretty regular basis now, and they've made a comment to me, that they haven't felt like other people were supportive for them, or I'm not going to get into too much details, but my relationship with them has completely changed. My grandpa and me, they were real involved in the church they were at for a while, and over this last 6 months particularly, my grandpa and me will call and like just talk about spiritual stuff all the time, man. Like just talk about God. Yeah, it's crazy. And like he's it feels good when one night particularly we were talking on the phone for 30 minutes just about our relationship with God and our experience, stuff that's happened over the years, and like you could tell he was in a pretty difficult time of his life, and he was like, "Man, I love this." He was like, this just having this conversation right here just brought my spirit up, right? And also there would have been other times when the beginning of this whole situation with my grandparents had started going on. My grandpa called me up out of the middle of nowhere and was like, "I know I can talk to you about this stuff because I'm sure you've been through some stuff like this." And it was just having that connection with them that just changed all kinds of stuff, and it's just cool, man. It's just built relationships, and another part of it was I started seeing how like as I was going through the amends process with my parents, I had some stuff. I had a previous marriage. My first wife passed away from a drug overdose back in 2010, and her daughter was 8, was just a child, when her mom passed away. And but her daughter, I'd recently over the last few years had, I sobered up and I'd gotten back in touch with her, and I was trying to help in different ways. And but she was going through some challenges herself with drug addiction, and still currently is actually. And but I tell you, like a big powerful experience through it was, as I seen how like I was such a young kid when I first started getting high and getting drunk that like my parents, they had to cut me off, at a pretty young age, and they wasn't really able to be a parent to me, right? Like. And my current marriage, my stepson lives with us, and my stepson's completely opposite. Like he's got ambitions, he's he works hard, he does all these things, but I got to see how like through the experience of like how I had to cut my stepdaughter off because it was unhealthy and helping her in certain ways, and then my marriage that I'm in now, it was a completely different experience. How I can see how like certain things my wife was doing with her son was parenting the stuff that she was doing that was able to like help her grow and have self-esteem and all these things over the years that I never really give my parents an opportunity to be that way with me because I was just young and strung out and stuff, right? So part of the amends was, kind of goes along with the practicing the principles in all my affairs is allowing them to like, allowing them to be parents. It wasn't just a finance thing or like just like with my grandparents, it wasn't just financial or whatever, but it was also like forming a relationship with them that I never really had. I was young when I started getting high and drunk, and like so I'd never really had. I hear people talking about getting their relationships back. I never had relationships. They were all one sided. You get what I mean? I was just a kid. So I actually have relationships with some of my family today that I'd never had before until now, right? And which has been cool, man. It's been cool, and I love walking guys through the process too. I love it when having, I sponsored a lot of different guys, and they get to have different experiences with it. And I don't have them wait. It was years before I really started getting to my amends, right? And so like, I got a lot of guys nowadays. It's like, I just had a guy he's 8 months sober, and he's already made a handful of his amends, and it's just cool, just watching the light come on in people's eyes and seeing the relationships. And I always share, like, when I initially did that amends with my grandfather, it didn't change right away, but a year or so later, just things slowly started changing, and so, it's real cool. My current sponsor he says the amends is AA's payday, right? He's got a lot of he's got a lot of stories like what you were just talking about, and with the houses and stuff, and yeah, man, it's just good stuff. And I tell you, like, which goes into 10, as I started to become more aware of what was going on and seeing how, I remember Charlie P. used to share this story. He said, he said he felt horrible. He'd stolen like $20 from his sister or something out of her purse one time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, I felt horrible about it. He was like, I went up to her and I was like, look, sis, I made I stole this $20 from you at one point, whatever, and I'm here to pay you back, and I'm sorry about it, and she was like, whoa, hold on a second. She's like, so out of all the years, you've stole the emotional quality from the family for years, in and out of jail, constantly in and out of trouble, stealing all the quality of this family for just years and years and years, hogging all the attention and doing all this. And she was like, and you're here right now to make a $20 amends that you stole out of my purse one time. You know what I'm saying? So, and it's funny because like going back to what we were talking about earlier with the stages of development, and, depending on what a person's been through or what they're just able to see currently, you'll find guys with situations like that where, I was talking to a guy earlier today that's about to start making his amends, and he was like, man, I don't really feel like I really did much to my sister. And I'm sitting there like, oh yeah, we got a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
which deepens the 10th step stuff. I get to see how, like, I'm full of fear, and or resentment or whatever is going on as I'm daily living through, walking through my day, and that process of me, I can find or see stuff that after I've made certain amends that I couldn't see before, right? Especially particularly like when I go to making amends with someone, one of the things I say when I'm pulling up, walking up or making an amends with someone is like, if there's anything I'm not aware of, please share it with me. I know I can be insensitive to things, and these are the things I'm aware of. Is there anything you want to share with me? Oh, some of the stuff I walked away from some of those conversations with a deep, deep understanding, like, holy crap, I just never realized I was doing some of this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it deepens my awareness, on my day-to-day living, as I can start seeing, like, wow, like I can start seeing this more, right?
Yeah. No, without a doubt, man, that that piece, however, did I leave anything out, or is there anything, like you want to tell me? It's like when I first heard about, doing that, it's just it almost seemed like a formality. Like what would I leave out? Like I'm here making the I'm telling you what I did wrong, but like you say, man, so many times it's just emotional, or the, I don't know, the sleepless nights and everything like that, like parents sleeping with their phones off the hook, because it's better than it ringing in the middle of the night to get like a phone call about them dying, and just horrible things.
Yeah.
But it's just, it really is an important piece, man. It really, really, my mom told me one time, this is a true story. She got cancer in 2000. It was either 2005 or early 2006. And I remember I was in a rehab, and I was in there in 5 and 6. But anyway, the point is, and it was like it was breast cancer, and it was touch and go there for a while. I mean, I don't even remember what stage it was, but it wasn't a joke. And one time she told me, she was crying. She goes, I prayed harder, and totally sincere. She goes, I prayed harder for you than I did for myself when I had cancer.
Wow.
And yeah. And it was, and I believed her. The important part of that is that I believe that's true. It wasn't just like, I've always prayed, it was just like one of the most sincere things she's ever said to me.
Wow.
And it just, I mean, of course I appreciated that, but God, that broke my heart,
Yeah.
So yeah, we never know, man. We just never know.
Powerful.
So, yeah. Mm-mm.
Yeah. I tell you, I think that it's funny because during this conversation, what keeps showing up for me is like when I'm going into some of my 10th step stuff, I'm pretty thorough. I have become quite a bit more thorough over the last year. It was interesting because it's funny because when I'm sharing this with like one of my new guys, sometimes I feel like they think it's a bit obsessive, right? Like, becoming awake and aware as we're going through the day, having this awakened spirit, and what does it say? It says, this thought brings us steps then, right? Continue for a lifetime, right? It says, continue to watch for selfish, dishonest, resentment, fear, right? When these things crop up, we ask God, at once to remove them, share them with another person, immediately, make amends if we've caused any harms, and we resolutely turn our thoughts towards someone we could help, right? I'm big on that today. I'm not always 100 on it. Don't get me wrong. If I do that 30% of the day, I'm pretty good. You get what I mean? Right?
Yeah.
So, but like when you're sharing that with a new guy, they're kind of looking at you like, "Come on, dude. I'm talking about reality, right?" No, I completely forgot that, right? And that's why I was talking about in step 9. As the longer I stay sober and the more I go through this work, how that becomes easier and easier and easier. After I start to wake up and I start to see how, like, man, I have a taste of the honey today. Like I don't understand. I know what God tastes, what it feels like, right? And I don't like feeling like when I'm separated from God, right? And the more and more that process deepens, it seems the easier it is for me to go through that 10th step stuff and turn to God, turn my thoughts towards someone I can help, right? What's your experience with that?
Man, it's the exact same thing. It's somewhat easy to look at the damage I caused when I was drinking because, you have the perfect scapegoat. It's like, well, I was drunk, my life was a mess. But I start creating chaos in sobriety, and bro, it's humbling. And, in sobriety, like I can really create some damage because like figuratively speaking, like I have some credit now. Like, like when I was in addiction, I might piss the guy off that works at the gas station, but now it's like I have kids and a wife and close friends that I can really, tick off. And I remember we were going, I heard Dr. Burns doing a little, group on the 10 step one time. And he talks about, he condensed the things down. He goes, prayer, share, amends, service, prayer, share, amends, service. So if I do something I'm not proud of, or if I have, bad thoughts or fear, whatever, it's selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, or what, whatever the 4 things, I don't have my book in front of me. He goes, we used to be able to drink to take those away. He goes, but if you do these 4 things, he goes, they'll go away too. Like I can be driving in traffic and feel a little insecure. Someone's got a cooler car than me, or someone cuts me off and I get pissed. He goes, if I say, hey, God, listen, I just got pissed right now. I don't want to feel this way. I don't want to live this way. Please remove this from me. Yeah. And then I call somebody and I say, hey, dude, I know this sounds silly. Sorry to waste your time with this. I'm just trying to 10 step. I got a little pissed in traffic. I prayed. I'm trying to share it with somebody. Yeah. And then if I flip the guy off or if I wrecked into his car, so, if I owe an amends, make the amends there. If I didn't do anything to warrant an amends, don't do it. He goes, and then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. Prayer, share, amends, service. He goes, let everyone in traffic drive the speed limit. He goes, if you do that, he goes, the disturbance will disappear. And, and I swear I've never forgotten that. And me, I'm the type of guy, I will listen to that. I will agree with that, and I will think I've done it for the rest of my life. Just sitting in this chair right now with you, agreeing, thinking, oh, yeah, that sounds like it could work. Yeah. And then we'll never do it, but think I've done, anyway, I try to do it. But but prayer, share, men's service, and it's funny how you talk about like the muscle growing. One time, my brother died, and then my dad died, and I was working through my dad's estate, which took forever. And then they found out my brother had died intestate, like, and he had never been, his estate. So we had to get all these documents for someone who doesn't have a will. And then 2 years after that, when I'm finally getting this sorted out, my grandfather dies, and I'm the only living heir at this point. Everyone else is gone. And so I'm going through his estate, and it just felt like don't get me, anyway, it was tough on me with the grief and with the, I'm not a paperwork guy. I'm not college educated. I don't send faxes and stuff, so this is all new to me.
Yeah.
And the lawyers in Louisville were getting on to me about a court date and these documents I needed to have notarized and all that stuff. And so finally, I'm all stressed out. I go and get them notarized, and I come home, I bring them home. I set them on the counter, and stuff's always getting moved around my house, whether it's a cleaning lady or babysitter or my wife, or, it's getting moved. And so I go to meet this deadline to go to get the paperwork, and I can't find them in the kitchen. And my wife's there, and the babysitter's there. And I was like, yo, where are these papers that I left here? And they both looked at me like I was stupid. They're like, well, I don't know. And I'm like, oh, so they just got up and walked away? I was like, no, and I'm like, I'm starting to get smart. Now they're kind of looking at me like, oh, God. And I was like, I got important shit to do. I was like, so just don't touch my stuff. Just, if it's not too difficult, if you see something, just leave it there. And I made a big deal of it.
Yeah.
And hand to God. I storm out of there. I'm walking upstairs, and my phone dings, and it's an email from the attorneys in Louisville, and said, we just received the paperwork today. Thanks for sending. I had already mailed it out, and I just forgot. You understand what I'm saying? And nobody knew about this but me. I'm the only. So my wife doesn't know the attorney. She's not looped in the email. I could have played this off for the rest of my life. And I remember I had to walk. Oh, it was like walking down to the gas chamber.
Oh man.
And I had to tell her, and I was just like, hey, listen, for one, I feel horribly about how I spoke to y'all. I was like, I did just get an email. I was like, it turns out I mailed them. Nobody touched them. And I didn't get the warm reception I had envisioned. I thought everyone would check and be like, oh, Aaron, it didn't really go that way. But it felt so good. Yeah. But it's just, I don't know, keeping the, 4 and 5, 4 through 9, I'm spring cleaning. I'm pulling out the couches and dusting the baseboards, you know what I'm saying? But in 10, I'm cleaning up the potato chip crumbs, that I'm pigging out watching this,
Nice.
Yeah, man.
So true, right? It's funny. I completely get it. I tell you, I like to talk about by the time, when you look at 10, it says, this is how we react, safe and protected. What we really have is a daily reprieve from the maintenance of our spiritual condition. And it talks about how, if you followed certain directions, you begin to sense his spirit, right, flowing through you. And I think that's cool because I think it's important to talk about, because that's what this step's really all about, right? Being awake and aware and going through the day. And me and Katie P have been going through the book, and she's real big on being awake and aware, and also taking the higher road. When I don't know if you've ever heard her say that, but she's talking about when I'm awake and aware, and I realize and I see there's some kind of internal dialogue where I'm wanting to share my 2 cents, and everyone needs to hear about it. And I can see that opportunity to just keep it shut. And it's cool because when I first got here, that was not possible, right? And it's not always possible today, obviously, but just awake and aware as I'm going through the day, and seeing also, I love how when it talks about, seeing when these things crop up, because for me, my experiences, what's the book say? It says, we searched out the flaws in our makeup, which caused our failures, right? Being convinced that self manifested in its various ways is what defeated us. We consider the common ways that it manifests, right? So the common ways self keeps showing up, right? And we talked about it last week a little bit on how what we're really recovering from is self and all the different ways it shows up, right? And so it's what's the alternative of that, right? Well, it's, keeping my mouth shut, being grateful, right? having some kind of gratitude as I'm going through the day, being helpful as I'm walking through the day, going to that, being more understanding. I like going to the St. Francis prayer, being more understanding, less understood, right? To love rather than to be loved, comfort rather than to be comforted, and, like what we were talking about when we were talking about the 4-step, when these areas of self are threatened or hurt, it's hard for me to act on that stuff sometimes, right? Especially if I hadn't got to this point in the work, and which was big, I enjoyed talking about it. So, and that carries into that awakening aware, that conscious contact, spiritual, where we have some kind of contact with the spirit, carries into the 11th step, right? And which is, goes back into like what we were talking about earlier with the daily prayers, asking God to help us go through the day. What does it say? Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out, right? And me and Chris was talking about how, like, technically, like in the 60s, meditation for Bill when he was writing the big book was something completely different than what a lot of people look at meditation for today, right? In the 30s, it was to thoughtfully ponder, pretty much. It's contemplation, pretty much. It was Charlie P. used to always talk about how, like, if you're meditating, if you're a general or you're someone that's like over a war, that's like you're looking at your map and you're meditating over it, and you're sitting there thinking, all right, we got these troops over here, and they're wore out, and they're all busted up, and they need to go over here. They probably need to go over here and go get some rest. We got these troops right here, and he's talking about just contemplating everything, right? And then, so when Bill was writing the big book, back then the definition of meditation was that, to thoughtfully ponder, right? And in the 60s, when the hippie movement and the Beatles and the Eastern philosophy and stuff really took off, the definition of how we really looked at meditation kind of changed to transcendental meditation, focusing on your breathing, being one with, like with the ground of your being and stuff like that. And which I get into both. And, but I really love how, if you really think about, by the time we get to this point in the work, it's like, okay, I realize lack of power is my dilemma. There is some kind of power out there, right? I'm going to make a decision to turn my will and my life over to this power, right? So I go through this process and find out how self shows up, right? Go through the inventory, and I start seeing some truth about what's going on. I start to see these truths are some pretty destructive in my life, and, to share them with another person, with God, and myself. And in 6 and 7, I really start getting closer to God, because I start seeing how, like, even though I see that these things are objectionable in my life, I still can't quit, right? So I'm still seeking some kind of power through them, right? And then, I start cleaning up the past, so I start getting rid of some of the guilt and the shame through the amends. And as I start to wake up spiritually, then it's like, now I have this pretty good understanding on what I believe is the direction of my life should go, right? Like I have a pretty good understanding on spiritual principles, like what we were talking earlier with the prayer, meditation, and vision. Each morning we ask our Creator to show us the way of patience, tolerance, kindliness, and love. As I start to ponder on what each one of these things looks like, meditate on what each one of those principles looks like, and then I can carry that vision with me throughout the day, which is part of 10, right? I mean, it says each day is the day where we must carry the vision of God's will in all our activities. And then 11, it just deepens that process, right? It's just, I start, so I like touching on that, because it took me a minute, when I first got sober, it took several years. I thought it was more transcendental meditation. And after I'd gotten to the work, I was like, oh, clearly he's talking about contemplation, right? And speaking of, for the listeners that like what we're talking about right here, and we have in July, we have JS from Arizona, which great guy. He just did a documentary on Bill Wilson called Conscious Contact. And really? Yeah, it's going to be coming out, I think, next week. And for the listeners, y'all keep in mind. So what it's called Conscious Contact, and he did a wonderful job where he went through, he went through some of Bill's, like the later part of his life and his spiritual journey, and he actually talks about what I'm talking about right now. He goes into, I think, the last 2 years that Bill was alive, he ended up doing like some transcendental meditation. Went to a class on a pretty regular basis about it, and he goes into more in depth with what I'm talking about with the transcendental meditation versus contemplation. So that keep your eyes peeled for that. Jay's going to be on the episode. I got 2 episodes with him in July. So let's see, July 15th, or 3 episodes, 15th, July 22nd, and July 29th. We're going to do on that. So yeah, just, it just leads us right into, the whole contemplate. Now we have this understanding on, what we're aiming towards, and we don't have the sufficient power to fulfill it, and now we have to have God, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How about yourself?
Man, that was all really, really good. It's I love 10 and 11. I love what you said. It's the some people call them the 10-step promises or whatever. That we react sanely. Normally, we're not interested. Seldom be interested in liquor. We're not fighting that the problem's been removed. All this and that. I remember I was going through that, and my sponsor, he goes, I don't know, probably 6 or 8 months sober, and he goes, when's the last time you woke up and really had to have a drink that day? Like really like had trouble fighting off a drink. And I was like, I don't really know. He goes, when's the last time like you literally had to like avoid a liquor store, almost made, just obsessing about it.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know. I don't even remember. He goes, it's almost like somebody came and just flipped the alcohol switch off, because before I came, I couldn't not drink. Like, I can't tell you, I don't want to go into, but I mean, I would swear I wasn't going to drink, like tears in my eyes, all this and that. And I'd somehow come up on some money or I'd panhandle and I was drinking that day. Yeah. And somehow I don't know if you've ever seen Toy Story. I think it's like Toy Story 3, but like Buzz Lightyear starts speaking in Spanish and it's all weird. And like, he's only, you're like, what the hell's going on? And then finally they like rip his back open and there's the little Spanish switch and they're like, oh, this shouldn't be on. Like, and they switch it back there. It's almost like somebody came and did that to me with like, the alcohol button. Yeah. And I love that, man. And it's kind of like, stay in tune or you can screw up, the daily reprieve and all that. But yeah, step 11, man. It's so funny because like when I came in, all I wanted to hear was, how not to drink. If it was not about how not, if you're telling me to make my bed or pay all my taxes or whatever, like it was just kind of like, well, you're missing. I'm here not to drink. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And it's, by the time I get to step 11, my life has, blossomed in such a way, everything I've kind of given to this program and all the suggestions I've taken have benefited me. So now it's like I'm a little more receptive to this whole like, letting God, run my life, and I was in a meeting one time and there was this guy, he was kind of a weird, he always looked like he had just almost gotten like TKO'd. Like, when somebody gets hit real hard and their eyes kind of go starry, you know what I'm saying? This guy always looked like that. And his hair was messed up all the time. I just don't know. And he got up to the podium to share one time. And he was one of these guys that, you see him walking up to the podium. It's like, oh, what's this guy going to say? But it's not original. I mean, they tell us to in the 12 and 12, but he talked about meditating on the St. Francis prayer. And you hit on this earlier. And one kind of like manual override I can do, like, where there is hatred, I may bring love. And he goes, I think it's something I actively hate right now. It could be a group of people. It could be an employee, a coworker. It could be, an ex, what he goes, let's actively send a little love out to them. Like, and you almost got to grit your teeth to do it. It's like, what? But just think of someone you hate and just say, hey, God, please bless them today. I hope they're having a good day. It's just like, it's like getting into a cold plunge. It just shocks the hell out of my, my spiritual system in a good way. And he talked about, going down every line like that, kind of like it talks about in the 12 and 12. And I've never forgotten that. And, going through 86 to 88, in the book, or technically the bottom of 85, it's weird because I always thought like, and there's no order to this. It's just something I picked up on, or not. That sounds not picked. I don't know. It's something that I thought was peculiar, but it talks about on awakening. And it does say like we ask God to direct our thinking, prayer, all this and that, and going through the, and it goes through all that, and then it says we usually conclude the period of meditation with a prayer that we be shown all through the day. What our next step is to be. I want to pray first. I want to, talk about everything. And then it's like, if I get time, I'll listen. If I get time, I'll kind of, chill and hear God. But I'm not saying this is an instruction. It can be interpreted, because like I say, but I kind of try to wake up, calm my mind, listen to, what God, is there anything I'm nervous to do that day? How would you have me handle? Okay, I'm going to sit here and be paid. I'm going to, this and that. And then once I've got that, it's like, okay, God, like, help me to kind of execute on this. Like, help me, you know what I'm saying? I don't want to call this guy. I'm nervous to go to the dentist. I don't want to do any, please just kind of help me with all this. And anyway, I always thought that was kind of cool. Because I don't know, but then the very last thing is about it's the old joke Steve L always talks about. He said he called his, well, it's two things real fast. He goes, I called my sponsor and said, man, I'm having trouble meditating. Like, I just can't get this meditation thing down. I'm struggling with meditation. And the sponsor goes, okay. He goes, well, what are you doing for meditation now? Like, what does your practice look like? And Steve goes, well, I'm not meditating. And he goes, so you don't have a problem with practice. He goes, you have a problem with execution, and that was me. That was me. I swear to God, for a long time. And when I call my sponsor these days and I am having a bad day or I'm stressed out, lots of times he asks me two questions. He goes, do you have any lingering amends you're not making? And the other question is, when's the last time you meditated? How was your meditation this morning? All this and that. And usually the meditation question, I mean, I'll just be honest with you. It's like, I almost forgot that was a step. Like, I don't know. And he's like, yeah, why don't you go do that? And anyway, but it's really beneficial, man. It's really beneficial. So
yeah, that's good stuff. Yeah. That's awesome. I had also heard, going into the nightly review is, I heard this guy say, he said, like I can have the best sailboat or the, just a nice boat and, and overnight or whatever, like, just, I could be on the path or whatever. And I'm always going to get a little off track. I may fall asleep or whatever and, anchor the boat or whatever, but I'm always going to get a little off track. Right. And he was like, the 10 and 11, is similar. It's like all of a sudden, what is the vision of God's will in my life, right? And now I have this set of questions to where I can, kind of do my nightly review and go into my next morning with okay, this is kind of what this is the vision of God's will is for me. Tom, you and me, when I first started doing the nightly review, Tom had given me this. He had some little books made, little spiral notebooks made that had he actually added a question on there, which was, did I gossip today? And you touched on that earlier, talking about gossiping in the sixth step, and which is a big one. It was cool just to throw in those questions. And then also my current sponsor, because we send nightly review back and forth, me and my sponsor, and I got like a group of guys that I do it with every night and through a text. But my current sponsor, he asked the question, was I a seeker? Was I a seeker or was I just coasting today? Right. And which is a good one, and it's pretty much just, trying to align my will to what I think God would have me be in each day. Right. And the nightly review questions, was I resentful? Was I afraid? Did I try to pack into the stream? Was I thinking about myself most of the day or all that's great stuff to just kind of contemplating on. And it also kind of aligns you back up with the purpose of what we're here for, right? Which leads into the 12th step, right? It's like, okay, I've been with the common theme over this last year or so that keeps standing out is like, all the, Judio this past week on the show, she said, the first 11 steps are getting you ready for the real work of AA, right? Which is step 12, right? And That's what this whole thing's all about. Even like if you look at service work, I mean, think about what you're really doing service for. Like if I'm going, we go to a treatment center on a pretty regular basis. If I'm going to a treatment center, I'm there to, prepare, to get ready for the work. I'm doing the work of AA, right? And, that's what the whole thing's all about is, extending my hand to the sick and suffering person that doesn't have a purpose in life, and fulfilling my purpose through that process, right, and giving them some hope, which is what this whole thing's about. It's not about. I thought for a long time it was about feeling better. Like what can Paul do to help Paul feel better? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was like that for a while. That was for quite a while in recovery. That's what I thought the end game goal was. And kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the character building in Step 7, and at the end of the day, like what I really believe I'm here for is to help the next person, right? Yeah. So share some of your stuff with that.
No, it's so true, man. One of the, I can't even remember what you said. You're talking about like the nightly inventory and like how to get back on track. And I can't swear to this. I haven't fact checked it, but one time I was listening to the guy talk, and he was a pilot, and he said he was talking about, and I'm not even saying this is a relation to AA, okay, so I'm not trying to read too much into it, but he talks about, they fly by beam, like I guess the beam is like the actual direct course they're supposed to, fly on the plane, and he goes, 95%, on average, about 95% of any flight is off the beam. Like the beam's this perfect line. Like, and you can't account for gusts of wind and elevation and all this. He goes, so basically the entire flight is just correcting, getting back on the beam. He goes, and that's kind of like my program. There's never a time where like 6 hours goes by where I'm like, I've been an absolute perfect, like just a flawless student of God's will. You know what I'm saying? It's always just kind of identifying and correcting, which I love. But yeah, the 12-step, man, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, tried to carry this message to other alcoholics and practice these principles in all our affairs. It's like you said, the steps bring me just to this different, I don't know, just it brings about something within me to where a drink's not necessary. I always thought if a drink ever became not necessary, then I could focus on being a good dude. You know what I'm saying? Like, let me not drink, and then I'll put money in the basket, and then I'll start going to the gym, and then no, it doesn't work that way. It's just kind of like, like a guy told me one time, he goes, in here we don't fight the problem. We just embrace the solution, and then the problem goes away, and it's so, and having worked the steps, the spiritual awakening, this may be controversial. I promise you it's not meant to. I think the degree to which one suffered, like to that exact degree, do they try to give this back to other people? Like if I had a tiny little rash on my knee and I found some little cream at Walgreens that took it away, I'm not going to be walking down the street like, if anyone's got a rash, go to Walgreens, aisle 6, the hydrocortisone, if it ever comes up 2 years down the road, I might but I'm not going to be going out of my way. But if somebody was in like a just a living hell, stage 4, fuck everything, and some like magically gets cured, you couldn't stop people from wanting to give that away. You understand what I'm saying? Like, absolutely. And I'm certainly not the worst, but I'm definitely was severely afflicted, so it's like, it still hurts my heart when people get this and don't want to give it away. Like everyone's had it. You sponsor guys, you pour life into them, and I don't care what they do for me, but they just don't ever sponsor anybody. They don't do, and I don't even mean from a judgment standpoint. It's just kind of like, man, but the dudes that, or women, anybody that really had it rough, you can't really stop them from giving it away. But anyway, the whole point of all that is I don't have to force myself to give this away. Like, it's just, I don't even, I mean, I feel indebted, but that's not my motivation. It's just, it'd be like if somebody cured, if it'd be like if I somehow stumbled upon the cure for cancer, like in my basement, and I'm in Starbucks the next day and some dude answers his cell phone in line behind me and he just starts sobbing. He goes, "Oh, it's stage 4. Like it's malignant. Oh my God." Like,
Yeah.
and if I just developed the cure, like, and then I would just turn around and be like, "Dude, do I have some good news for you?" You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like and it's kind of like that with this. Like I look forward to giving it away. And the practice and the principles in all our affairs, that, I mean, we covered that a lot, like, on 6 and 7, like, convince this is a better way, but I'm to the point, I don't, it sounds tacky, but it, I know I've got to do this to stay so. Like, if I'm ever just having a bad day and want to just kind of have a cheat day, like where I'm just not a nice guy or whatever, it's almost like the guardrails, or you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just kind of like, man, don't get too far off, or you're liable to get drunk. So I try to practice these principles, A, because I don't want to drink, and B, because my life's better when I do.
Amen.
Yeah, and the days I'm laying in bed and I've had a bad day emotionally, my wife and I are arguing, I'm upset, I can't sleep, I pigged out, I'm just, it's all when I operated on self, like my mind will tell you, like, my mind will tell me, like, Aaron, you want to have a good day, turn your phone on silent, don't take anyone's calls, eat whatever you want, you know what I'm saying, don't go to work, just chill, watch The Simpsons, just, post up, I've got a 9 foot by 9 foot bed. You know what I'm saying? Like I live, you know what I'm saying? Just chilling there. And when I do that, at the end of the day, I feel gross and worthless and full of dread and guilt. I gotta make up all this tomorrow. It's just horrible.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, when somebody says, like, well, wake up early and go out to the detox and take a meeting there and pick these guys up and blah blah blah, that sounds horrible. But when I do that, I feel like $1,000,000 at the end of the day.
Amen.
But anyway, but yeah, it's my favorite thing in the world. Like, other than my kids, like, I mean, I swear to God, it's doing stuff like this, and you know what I'm saying.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. No, and I can relate to that. Yeah, I can relate to what you're saying. With the same thing, like, actually this past weekend, there was a couple yesterday morning. I didn't want to go to a meeting, and I was like, I'm going to go to a meeting, and I ended up had a pretty good experience with it. Met some cool people, but no, I get that completely. It's the whole self-serving thing, right? And if you look at, like, if you even take a look at what the 7th step prayer is saying, right? It says, my Creator, now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. It doesn't say remove my character defects. It says remove from me every single defected area of my character that stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows, right?
mm-hmm.
Which is pretty much what we're talking about. It's the work, right? It's like, yeah, man, it's cool. I've really enjoyed this, man. A lot of cool experiences. Just I like it. I pretty much agree with everything you have to say, man. Really cool. We need to get together and come up with some more topics, and over this next year have some stuff. Also, I'm sure you have some people in your community, like around the community, that you suggested. I remember you'd mentioned Sam in the past. Me trying to I'd briefly talked to Sam briefly, sent him a message talking to him, wanting to get him on here, and so we'll see about that. And this has been fun.
Yeah,
real fun.
It really has. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Yeah, if you have Sam on here, it'll be just like talking to me, except a whole lot better. Like, everything I've learned, everything I learned from him.
Nice.
So
is Sam your sponsor? Is he your sponsor?
He was for, I mean, years and years before I even stayed sober. And then he was my sponsor for like the first 7 years here, this time. But it's a funny story. When I got sober this time, I called him to sponsor me, and we had worked together for years, and I never got it. And he basically said, he goes, Aaron, I've given you everything I've got. He's like, I'm happy to sponsor you, but we're just going to do the exact same thing we've done the last 10 times, and it hasn't clicked. Yeah. He goes, so why don't you work with this guy, British John? And I said, okay, yeah, perfect. And so I start working with British John for a few months, and and nothing was wrong. I mean, it was great. But one day I just said, I don't know. I just said, hey, Sam, can we please do this? Like, I'm more, I'm comfortable with you. And so I went back to Sam. And then after 7 years, I got the, perspective changes. And I was like, I never finished what I started with John. Like, I mean, he, you know what I'm saying? Like, he sponsored me for several months. This and that. Anyway, so about 1.5 years ago, I went back to British John, and so he's my sponsor now.
Nice.
And but Sam married us. Like, he's my best friend. You know what I'm saying? He was over here yesterday and today. Like, me and him are just tight as can be. But yeah, he sponsored me forever.
Nice.
So
Yeah.
But anyway, but yeah, man, give him a call. You know what I'm saying? And if you come up with anything, I would love to do more. You know what I'm saying? This is really fun. I get along with you, and or not get along, but I feel like we,
Sure.
we work well together. So,
Absolutely.
But yeah, just holler at me, man.
Cool, man. Well, I appreciate it. And for all the listeners this week, we have this Wednesday, KDP from Austin, Texas is going to be doing steps 8 and 9. We've been going through the big book, and we've kind of been piecing it out. She's such a busy lady, and we started off rolling, and now we're piecing the next couple out. Yeah, so appreciate you, Aaron, and let's stay in touch, buddy.
Yeah, thank you, brother. I'll be talking to you soon.
All right, man. Have a good night.
Thanks, you too. I'll see you.
See you, buddy.
Bye.
Hello. Thank you for listening to 3 Legacies Recovery Recordings. If you enjoy our program, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to share with a friend. We're also self-supporting, so feel free to contribute to the channel through Venmo at Recovery Recordings 615. Please note that the views expressed on this podcast are solely our individual views and do not represent any official stance of any 12-step program. We are not affiliated with any specific recovery organization, and this content should not be considered as professional advice for alcoholism or addiction.